Yasmin was 3 glasses deep into the Rusty Claw's bottom shelf wine when the tavern door slammed open hard enough to rattle the lanterns. Cold wind sliced through the stale smoke, carrying the sharp bite of pine and rain. Every head in the room turned, hers included, because no one stormed into Eldridge's roughest bar like they owned the place unless they were looking for trouble or bringing it. The man who stepped inside wore darkness like armor, black wool cloak, boots still crusted with mountain mud, shoulders broad enough to block half the doorway. Even with his hood shadowing his face, the way he moved, deliberate, predatory, unhurried, whispered Alpha King. Heath Vale. The same man who'd once looked at her like she was the only thing worth seeing, then turned away when duty demanded it. 3 years. Yasmin had convinced herself the memory had dulled to a bruise instead of a blade. He scanned the room with amber eyes, missing nothing, and when they landed on her in the far corner booth, the air between them tightened like a bowstring pulled to snapping. He crossed the floor without hesitation, ignoring the sudden hush, the instinctive dip of heads from anyone who recognized him. He stopped at her table, pulled out the opposite chair and sat, elbows on scarred wood, close enough that she caught his scent. Smoke from a recent campfire, crushed heather, the faint metallic edge of stormy air. Familiar. Dangerous. "That's your third," he said, voice low. His gaze flicked to the empty glass beside her half-full one. "Who's worth drowning in wine tonight?" Yasmin let the silence stretch just long enough to remind him she wasn't one of his subjects anymore. Then she lifted the glass, held his stare over the rim, and took a slow sip. The burn grounded her. "Old ghosts," she answered finally. "They're persistent, Your Majesty." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but enough to reveal a dimple that softened his fierce features. "You always did cut straight to it, Yasmin." He signaled the barkeep without looking away from her. 2 fresh glasses arrived quickly. He pushed one toward her. "Drink with me, then. We have unfinished business." Her pulse kicked hard. Unfinished? That was one way to describe the night he'd kissed her against the courtyard wall, hands framing her face like she was fragile and priceless, the faint echo of their shared heartbeat thrumming between them for the first time. She'd felt it bloom in her chest, a quiet drumbeat that whispered he was hers, only for him to walk out at dawn because the council had secured his future with Lady Ivana of House Calder. An alliance, borders, stability. She'd packed her bags before the hollow ache in her chest could swallow her whole, and left the capital without a backward glance, convincing herself that she'd been nothing more than a fleeting distraction. She set the glass down untouched. "If this is about the old poisoning, cases, I sent my notes before I left. Everything I knew is in the royal records." "It isn't." Heath leaned in, voice dropping lower. "The poisons are back. Shadow Veil variants laced with something new, something that leaves no trace in the blood. 3 counselors dead in the last month. And the latest victim was carrying one of your old antidote recipes in his pocket when he collapsed. Like a message." A chill crawled down her spine that had nothing to do with the draft from the door. "You think someone's taunting you. Or me. I think someone wants both of us looking over our shoulders." His eyes searched hers, steady, intense. "And I need the one person who's ever beaten this poison before. Come back to the castle. Help me stop it. After that..." He let the words hang. "After that, we finish what we started, or we end it clean. Your choice." Yasmin studied the amber liquid in her glass, the way it caught the lantern light like trapped fire. 3 years of building walls, of telling herself the ache was just habit, that every heartbreak left scar issue. Yet one look from him, one steady, searching gaze, and her walls were already trembling. If I say no? She asked. His jaw tightened, the first real sign of strain she'd seen. Then the next body might be mine. And worse, I'd go knowing I never got the chance to make things right with you. The tavern noise felt distant, muffled. She felt the old pull, fierce, unwelcome, intoxicating, stir in her chest again. Damn him. She swallowed. You're married to Ivana. Either way, this isn't my fight anymore. Something raw and regretful crossed Heath's face before he reined it in. He shook his head once, slow. No. The engagement ended months after you left. Quietly. I broke it off myself. The admission hung between them. No wife, no queen at his side. Yasmin's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to bolt, protect the fragile peace she'd carved out. But another part, the part that still woke up some nights reaching for a warmth that wasn't there, needed this. Needed to face him, solve this poison riddle, needed closure, even if it hurt like hell to get it. So she lifted the fresh glass, clinked it against his untouched one. Fine, she said, voice low but firm. I'll help you stop it. But when the last traitor's named, this ends. I walk away. No looking back. No more unfinished business. Heath's mouth curved. Just a hint of that old, disarming half-smile that had once undone her in stolen moments. Thank you, Yasmin. I know what I'm asking, and I know I don't deserve it, but I promise you this. While you're at Ironwood Keep, no one will touch you without going through me first. She met his gaze, searching for the lie, finding only quiet resolve and something warmer, something that looked dangerously like hope. We'll see, she whispered. And just like that, Yasmin was stepping back into the storm she'd sworn to leave behind, knowing full well that the real danger wasn't the poison. It was him. They rode out before the town woke. Yasmin had packed light, a habit from years of leaving places before she could grow too fond of them. One satchel of herbs and tools, one change of clothes, the small leather journal she carried everywhere. Heath's guards fell into formation around them without a word, 4 riders in dark cloaks who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. The only sounds were hoofbeats on wet earth, and the soft sound of rain beginning again in the pines overhead. She told herself the silence was comfortable, but it wasn't. She was acutely aware of Heath riding beside her, close enough that she could see the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands held the reins loose and easy despite everything. He rode the way he did everything, like the world would simply arrange itself around him if he waited long enough. It used to charm her. Now it just reminded her how far apart their lives had drifted. He broke off the engagement. The thought kept surfacing against her will, a splinter she couldn't stop pressing. Months after I left. He broke it off himself. She'd spent the years since constructing a very tidy narrative. Heath had chosen duty, and she had chosen dignity, and that was the end of it. Clean. Survivable. But that narrative was apparently no longer sound. You're going to strain something, Heath said without looking at her. I beg your pardon? Thinking that hard, I can hear you brooding. Yasmin kept her eyes on the road ahead. I'm thinking about alkaloid compounds and how Shadowvale reacts in the bloodstream. Forgive me if I don't find it entertaining enough to share. The corner of his mouth curved, just enough to reveal a dimple she'd tried to forget. The road curved north, and the rain came down harder, and Yasmin pulled her hood up and refused to look at him for the next 4 hours. Ironwood Keep announced itself long before they reached it. First the smell. Cold stone and pine resin and wood smoke, a combination so specific to this place that her body recognized it before her mind did. Then the shadow of it rising against the gray sky, the towers she'd once sketched in her journal like a girl who believed grand places held grand promises. The gates opened at Heath's approach. Stable hands materialized. A woman in a gray steward's cloak appeared at the courtyard steps and began reciting logistics in a low, efficient voice. Prepared rooms, scheduled briefings, the archive access Yasmin had been promised. Heath listened without breaking stride, giving small nods and quiet confirmations. He hadn't changed here either. Still every inch the king. He paused at the entrance to the east tower and turned to face her properly for the first time since the bar. The light was gray and flat and made his features look exquisitely carved from the same stone as the castle. "I know what I asked you to walk back into," he said quietly. "I won't pretend it's a small thing." Yasmin looked at him steadily. "Good. Don't." Something moved in his expression. There and gone, too fast to name. He stepped aside to let her pass. Her workspace was on the 3rd floor, and it was, she had to admit, exceptionally well prepared. A long stone workbench, iron rings for drying herbs, a proper ventilation shaft above the flame station, and in the corner, 3 crates of evidence from the poisoning cases, effects of the victims, correspondence, sealed sample jars. Whoever had arranged this knew exactly what she needed without being told. She turned to find Heath leaning in the doorway, watching her take it in. "The steward has your notes from the old cases, the ones you left in the archives." He paused. "I had them copied before you left. I didn't know why at the time." The admission landed somewhere under her ribs. She turned back to the workbench. "I'll need a day to review everything before I can meet with anyone," she said. "And I need the full autopsy notes, all 3 victims. They'll be here within the hour. And I work alone. No guards standing over my shoulder while I think." "You've got it." She waited until his footsteps faded down the stairs before she allowed herself to press both palms flat against the workbench and breathe. The lightheadedness was irritating. She recognized it for exactly what it was. Not illness, not hunger, just him, just the particular effect he'd always had on her. She was 28 years old. She had synthesized antidotes under pressure, had faced down a wolf in mid-leap without her knees giving out. She was not the kind of woman who went dizzy in a man's presence. But she was, however, the kind of woman who went dizzy in his. She breathed through it, slowly, until the workbench felt solid again beneath her hands, felt the echo bond settle into its low, persistent hum, the knowledge that he was 2 floors below her, moving through familiar rooms. "Don't," she told herself firmly. "You are here for the poison. Focus on the poison." She reached for the first crate and got to work. The autopsy notes arrived as promised, delivered by a young guard who didn't meet her eyes and left quickly. Yasmin spread them across the workbench and read in the order she always did. Cause of death first, then symptom progression, then the absence of things, which was always more telling than the presence. 3 victims. Lord Anselm, Lord Ferris, Councilwoman Petra. All 3 were found without marks. All 3 had confusion in the hours preceding death, staring at things that weren't there, mumbling to themselves. Then quietly, irreversibly, heart failure. Shadow Veil, Yasmin thought. The hallucination signature was unmistakable. The fungus worked on the terror centers of the brain, dug up the worst things a person carried and made them overwhelmingly real. She'd seen it once before, during the court plague 7 years ago. She'd spent 3 months developing the antidote. She remembered every step. But something was different here. She pulled the jars closer and uncorked the first one carefully, running it under her nose with practiced restraint. The base note was Shadow Veil, that dark rot sweetness she'd recognize in her sleep. But beneath it, something else. Sharper, almost citric. Her stomach dropped. She knew that smell. She knew it because she'd written about it once, late at night, in her private journal. Not even a proper entry, just 3 scrawled sentences to herself about an application she'd dismissed as too dangerous to pursue. An idea she'd never published, never mentioned, never breathed aloud to anyone. She set the jar down before her hands could betray her. Who? Who had been that close, that careful, that invisible? She was still staring at the uncorked jar when she heard the door and turned, to find Heath in the frame, 2 cups in hand. "What is it?" he said immediately. She turned from the workbench. "Someone was in my private journals." Heath went still. "Not my submitted notes, my personal journals." Her words came out clipped, fury moving beneath them like a current. "I never published the Ashworth theory, never told a soul. It exists in 3 sentences I wrote to myself in the middle of the night." She looked at him. "And it's in that compound." Heath set the cups down on the edge of the workbench without looking away from her. "Who had access to your journals?" "I'm not sure." She pressed her lips together, debating whether to trust Heath with everything. "Give me a list. Anyone who was ever in your space uninvited. Anyone who showed unusual interest in your work." "I've been thinking about that since I opened the jar." Yasmin looked back at the samples, something cold and unpleasant settling in her chest. "There are a few names, but one keeps rising to the top." She didn't say it yet. She needed more before she was willing to say it. Heath seemed to understand that, and didn't push, even as his eyes searched hers. "Their final word," she said. "All the victims said the same word before they died. Echo. You know what that means, right?" Heath's jaw tightened. "The echo bond isn't widely known, but it's documented in the old records. Rare cases, 2 people whose instincts and abilities run so perfectly complementary that they begin to share sensation, emotion, sometimes thought." His eyes met hers. "Someone knows about ours." The air went out of the room. Someone knows. She'd never said the word aloud to anyone. The night she'd first felt it, they'd been working on a dying man. A stable hand, brought in from the eastern gate, convulsing on the healing room table with something in his blood that none of the castle physicians could identify. Heath had come in because the man was his, one of his personal guard's brothers, and he'd stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed, and that expression she'd come to recognize, the one where he was controlling something very large and quiet behind his eyes. She'd worked for 3 hours straight. Heath had stayed, handing her things before she asked for them, learning her rhythm without being told. At some point, he'd rolled his sleeves up and held the man still through a violent episode with a steadiness that had made her look at him differently. She'd saved the stable hand. Just barely. Afterward, she'd sat on the floor, Heath beside her, close enough that his shoulder pressed against hers, both of them coming down from the exhaustion of crisis. She'd been absently turning an empty vial in her fingers. He'd reached over and taken it from her hands gently. And that was when she'd felt it. A wave of feeling moving through her that was too large to be her own. Relief so profound it had a physical weight. And beneath it, softer, almost tentative. "Your lips are so..." Distracting directed at her with an intensity that took her breath away. She'd turned to look at him. He made a slow, almost pained wince, like a man who'd just knocked something expensive off a shelf and was watching it fall in terrible slow motion. "That," she'd said softly, "what I just felt. Was that..." "Yes." His voice low, rough at the edges. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you'd feel it too." She remembered the silence that followed, the empty vial still in his hand, the dying candle, his shoulder warm against hers, and the faint color climbing the back of his neck that she was certain no member of his court had ever seen. "Don't apologize," she'd said finally, taking mercy on him. She'd meant it as reassurance. What she hadn't anticipated was the way his expression would change, the careful king's mask dissolving completely. Then he'd lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, watching her over the top of her hand with those amber eyes until her heart was galloping so hard she was certain he could feel it ricocheting through the mysterious bond between them. "We should talk about this," he'd said against her fingers. "Yes," she'd agreed. "We should." Except they ran out of time. Now she stood in a different room in the same castle, feeling the echo of that same bond turn quietly in her chest, like a coal that had never fully gone dark. She could feel his unease, his protectiveness coiling beneath it like something braced for a fight. "Whoever this is," Yasmin said carefully, "they're not just studying the poison." She held his gaze. "They're studying us." She didn't sleep much that first night. She worked until the candles burned low, then lay on the narrow bed in her assigned chamber and stared at the ceiling and thought about the list. 4 names had access. 3 she could account for with solid alibis or motivations that didn't track. The 4th kept snagging at her like a rough edge. She hadn't thought about this person in years, which, she now realized, might have been exactly what they intended. Stop. She was building a case on suspicion and pattern recognition, which was useful, but not yet evidence. She needed to work the problem methodically, the way she'd always worked every problem, one compound at a time. She finally drifted to sleep somewhere before dawn. 2 floors below, Heath didn't sleep at all. He sat at the window of his chamber, watching the dark tree line, trying to organize his thoughts into something useful. His wolf, as usual, was not helping. She stayed, it offered, with the smug satisfaction of an animal who felt entirely vindicated. "Told you." She stayed to solve a poisoning case. "It's not the same thing," Heath thought back. "She smells different than before," his wolf continued. Heath glanced up from the window. "Different how? Before she smelled like herbs in the castle. Now she smells like something uniquely her. But I can't tell what." "I need to get closer," his wolf continued, unburdened by dignity, "to smell her better. Just for a moment. Just to know all of it." "Absolutely not," Heath shot back. "You were not very good before," his wolf said, in the tone of someone raising a subject that was long overdue. "You let her leave. You didn't follow. It was complicated. It was not. You were sad for a very long time, and you still have the flower." Heath looked at the pressed night bloom on the table for a long moment. "Don't lose her again," his wolf said. "Whatever you have to do, she's ours. She's not ours. She hasn't chosen that. She will. But you have to be better this time. Tell her things. Use your words. Women like that." His wolf, apparently satisfied with having made its point, went quiet. Heath had felt her dreaming earlier, a distant signal through the bond. Restless, working even in sleep. "She's dreaming about the case," he thought. "She's dreaming about you," his wolf piped up, with enormous confidence and zero evidence. Heath almost smiled despite himself. He sat there until the sky began to lighten, the night bloom flower on the table. When the first gray light came through the window, he finally rose and found himself hoping she'd slept at least a few hours. 2 floors up, Yasmin opened her eyes to a ceiling she'd been staring at for most of the night and felt the echo bond carrying something she couldn't quite name. Warmth. Patience. The faint impression of someone who had been awake the same hours she had, keeping a different kind of watch. "Splendid," she said to the ceiling and got up to make tea. The banquet was Heath's idea. "The council expects a show of normalcy," he said on her 5th day. They were in her workspace, the kind of late-night proximity that had become, without either of them acknowledging it, a regular thing. He'd taken to bringing food she didn't remember to eat. She'd taken to not protesting it. If I cancel engagements, it signals fear. And fear in this castle is a resource our enemy can use. Yasmin was bent over a new sample, her hair escaping whatever she'd pinned it into hours ago. So you want to sit in a room full of people while a poisoner watches for opportunity. I want to sit in a room full of people with the only person who can identify the poison before I've swallowed enough to matter. He said it evenly. You'll be able to smell it, yes? She looked up. In high concentration, yes. Shadow Vale has a distinctive odor that survives cooking. But if it's been properly masked in wine, then stay close to me. His amber eyes on hers. That's all I'm asking. Please. Yasmin looked away first. I want to see the seating arrangement first. The great hall looked magnificent. Candlelight on stone, the long table crowded with faces she half recognized. Heath had given her a place at the end nearest the kitchens, close enough to intercept anything that reached him. She moved through the room quietly, doing what she'd always done at court, making herself invisible, watching. Council members were nervous. She could see it in the overly careful laughter, the way eyes moved too quickly across the table. 3 of their own in a month. Whatever Heath had told them about her presence, she suspected it was something vague and unsatisfying. She was on her second circuit of the room when she smelled it. So faint it barely registered. A thread of something dark and sweet beneath the wine being poured at the far end of the table. She was moving before she'd finished processing it, her hand already in her pocket where she kept the emergency compound she'd prepared that morning, knowing the banquet was coming. She'd hoped not to need it. She reached Heath's cup 2 seconds before it reached his lips. Don't, she said quietly, her hand over his. The table went still. 20 pairs of eyes turned on them. Heath looked at her over the rim of the cup, his pulse steady where her fingers grazed his wrist. The wine, he said, just as quiet. The decanter. She set the cup down. Let her eyes move to the server who'd poured it, a young man who was already backing toward the kitchen door, his face the particular blank of someone performing innocence. Stop him. The server bolted. 2 guards crossed the room in 4 strides and caught him before he reached the door, his boots scrabbling on the flagstones, a sound like something desperate and animal. The council erupted, chairs scraping, voices colliding, someone knocking a glass to the floor where it shattered like a small explosion. Heath's personal guard materialized, forming a perimeter around the table with a speed that was almost frightening. Heath was at her elbow. Come with me, he said quietly, and his hand was at the small of her back, steering her toward the corridor. Outside the hall, the noise became muffled, the chaos reduced to something manageable. She turned to face him and felt the stillness leave her all at once, replaced by something shakier, the body's delayed accounting of what had almost just happened. She opened her satchel with trembling hands and measured the antidote compound by touch, the way she could do it in darkness. Drink this. She held it out. Precautionary. You hadn't swallowed any, but proximity exposure is possible. Heath took the vial without protest and drank it, his eyes on her face the entire time. She reached up and checked his eyes, pupils even, responsive, then pressed 2 fingers to the pulse at his throat and counted. Steady. Strong. She became aware, in the same moment, that she was standing very close to him, that her fingers were still at his throat. You're okay, she said. Her voice came out quieter than intended. Thanks to you. He said it simply, gratitude and admiration compressed together. I'd been watching the decanters all evening. I know. A pause. I was watching you watch them. The torchlight moved between them, She dropped her hand from his pulse and took a breath, but found she couldn't quite make herself step back yet. Yasmin, look at me. She slowly met his gaze and found something raw in his expression, stripped of whatever careful distance he usually managed. I spent 3 years telling myself I'd handled it correctly, he said. That letting you go was the right call. That duty required it, and you were better off. A pause. I'd like you to know that I was lying to myself for all 3 of those years. Yasmin felt her heart jolt into her throat. She looked away, focusing on the torchlight moving against the stone wall. The echo bond was doing something unhelpful, his emotion bleeding into hers until she couldn't cleanly separate them, relief and want, and a grief so old it had settled deep. You were engaged, she said carefully. It wasn't lying to yourself. It was just reality. Yasmin, a king needs to make hard choices. I understood that then, and I understand it now. You don't need to. I broke it off. His voice was quiet, but it cut through hers, cleanly. 4 months after you left, I stood in front of the council and ended it, but couldn't give them a single reason that made political sense. He paused. Because the real reason was that I couldn't stop thinking about you. Couldn't stop feeling you through the bond, even muted, even at a distance. She said nothing. Her jaw was tight. I'm not telling you this to pressure you, he continued. I'm telling you because you deserve to know it happened, that I didn't just move on, that there was no moving on. The torchlight guttered between them. That doesn't fix anything, she said finally. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I worked very hard to stop that wound from bleeding, and I'd really rather not tear all that open again just to find out it falls apart the same way. I came after you, he said quietly. She went still. Once the engagement was over, I came to Eldridge. He held her gaze, not flinching from it. I found your house. I was going to knock on the door and say everything I should have said before you ever had reason to leave. A muscle worked in his jaw. And then I saw you. Saw me, she repeated carefully. Through the window. You were laughing at something. Genuinely laughing. The way you used to when you thought nobody was watching. You looked. He stopped. Steadied himself. You looked free, Yasmin. His voice dropped. There was a man there. I didn't know who he was, but I saw he made you laugh again, and you looked so completely at peace, like the life you'd built there fit you in a way the castle never had. She opened her mouth, then closed it, wanting to hear the rest. I stood there for a long time watching you, Heath continued, but then I walked away, because I thought, he exhaled. I thought you'd made your choice, that coming back into your life would be the most selfish thing I'd ever done. So I came home, and I tried to bury it. The torchlight moved between them. And now? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I need you to know the truth. His eyes held hers, raw and direct. Whatever you do with it, I came for you. I just lost my nerve at the last moment. The silence stretched. Ferran was my neighbor, she said finally. He was 60 years old and he grew cabbages. Heath stared at her. The man in the window you saw, she said. He brought me vegetables and told bad jokes, that's all. She watched the full weight land on his face, first with surprise. Ah, he said quietly, trying to reckon his own spectacular miscalculation. Then, despite everything, despite the poison and the last 5 days of careful walls, she felt the laugh rise in her chest before she could stop it. Small, involuntary, escaping before she could decide whether it was appropriate. Heath looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, she thought, at the sound of it. 2 years, he said. I spent 2 years. Mourning a cabbage farmer, she finished. I hate him, Heath muttered under his mouth. He's been dead for a year, she said. So that seems excessive. Heath closed his eyes briefly, which made her laugh again, properly this time, and when he opened them, the raw grief hadn't left, but something lighter had joined it. I wasted so much time. Time I could have spent. He stopped. His eyes moved over her face, taking inventory. I keep thinking about everything I missed. Every day of yours I wasn't there for. Heath. I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. His hand lifted slowly, giving her every chance to step back. His fingers found the line of her jaw, featherlight. I'm saying it because I don't want to waste any more of it. The echo bond surged between them, his wanting and hers, indistinguishable, a warmth that felt like coming home. She should step back. She was fully aware she should step back. I'm not rushing you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I just need you to know that I'm not going anywhere this time. Whatever you decide. She looked up at him. The torchlight caught the amber of his eyes, and she thought about the king who had stood outside her window and walked away because he loved her too much to be selfish, which was the most infuriating and heartbreaking thing she'd ever heard. You are genuinely the most, she started. He moved in and kissed her, soft, barely there at first, his mouth brushing hers like a question. She held herself still for one breath, two. Then she kissed him back. His hand slid into her hair and the kiss deepened, all-consuming with the heat of something that had been patient for a very long time and had finally run out of patience. She felt the echo bond roar between them, his emotion and hers crashing together. She had both hands fisted in the front of his shirt without remembering reaching for him, and he made a low sound against her mouth that dismantled something in her chest. She pulled back. Her entire body rebelled against the loss of his lips. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, breathing unsteadily, her hands still gripping his shirt. His arms came around her and held her there, his chin against her hair, just breathing the same air for a moment, coming back to themselves. I can't do this, she said quietly. Not yet. She felt his arms tighten slightly. But I rebuilt myself after you, slowly and badly, and then eventually well, and I need, she searched for it. I need to trust it this time, not just want it. Besides, we still have to solve the poison. A long silence. All right, he said. Not wounded, not pressing, just accepting. She heard him exhale. All right. She closed her eyes, felt the echo bond carry the shape of his wanting and his patience, and somewhere beneath both, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. The evidence arrived in stages, the way the worst revelations always did. She found the first thread the following afternoon, not from the archives, not from the correspondence, but from something so small she almost missed it entirely. She'd been reviewing the victim's personal effects for the third time. Lord Ferris's signet ring, Lady Petra's correspondence seal, Lord Anselm's pocket journal, water-damaged, most of it illegible. Except on the last readable page, a single line in Anselm's cramped handwriting. Raised concerns with L.I. Yasmin sat with that for a long moment. L.I. She brought it to Heath without comment, just set it on the table in front of him and watched his face. All 3 victims were pushing for the Eastern Peace Treaty, Yasmin said. You told me that yourself, and whoever is behind this has been systematically removing everyone who supported it. She paused. That's not random. That's a strategy. Heath was quiet for a moment, something working behind his eyes. The council's balance shifted after Petra died, he said slowly. The peace vote would have passed 3 weeks ago with all 3 of them alive. Now it's deadlocked. He looked up. Someone needed it deadlocked. Someone who benefits from the alternative, Yasmin said. Lady Ivana. He said it quietly. She's been the loudest voice for Eastern expansion since the engagement ended. She needed a new way to make herself indispensable. Heath was already moving to the door. I'll have her correspondence pulled from the archives. Heath. He stopped. She chose her next words carefully. She was here 3 years ago, when someone accessed my chambers. She held his gaze. And I think she had more reason than anyone to want to know everything about me. Because of our bond? If she suspected it existed, if she saw it, felt it, she would have understood exactly what it meant for her position. So, this was never just about the treaty, he said. No, I think we were always part of it. Pull the correspondence. Let's see what we find. Heath sent for it immediately. They spread it across the workbench together, and Yasmin read with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to pick out patterns. She found it within the hour. Letters to a court apothecary, quietly removed from his position 8 months ago, she now understood, because he'd become a liability. The coding was careful, but not careful enough, not to someone who knew what she was looking for. References to the old cases, to improving on original methodology. Then, 2 years ago, a single request that stopped her cold. East Tower. Second shelf. Leather journal, green cover. The green cover was her most private journal, the one she'd kept under her pillow. Yasmin's hand went very still on the page. She'd written everything in that journal. Every half-formed theory, every abandoned hypothesis, every late-night thought she'd never intended for anyone else's eyes. 3 sentences about Ashworth that she'd dismissed as theoretical, now being sharpened into a weapon. Yasmin. Heath's voice, low and careful. He'd been watching her face. She looked up, felt the echo bond register something she couldn't name. Cold fury, she thought, moving through her like groundwater, slow and deep and everywhere at once. She was in my room, Yasmin said quietly, going through my things, reading my private work. She set the letter down with extreme care. While I was still living here, while I thought I was... She stopped herself before thinking the word. Safe. She thought about the first time she'd seen Ivana, before the engagement, before any of it, just a beautiful stranger at a crowded dinner table, the kind of woman who made a room quietly reorganize itself around her. Yasmin hadn't even known her name yet, but Ivana had looked at her. Once, directly, across the full length of the table, not the glancing dismissal that nobility usually directed at people below their station, but something more focused. A careful, assessing look, studying her, learning the shape of her, the same way Yasmin studied a compound she intended to repurpose. Then Ivana had looked away, and the moment dissolved. Yasmin had told herself she'd imagined it. She's currently in the castle, Heath said, drawing her back to the present. She didn't attend the banquet last night, thought. The server who was caught, Yasmin said slowly. What did he say when you questioned him? That he was paid. He never saw a face. The money was left in his quarters. But he was in the castle, which means she didn't need to be present herself. Heath turned from the window. His expression was controlled, a king locking down. She's been here for 2 months as a council advisor. Access to the kitchens, the wine stores, the staff. He paused. A muscle worked in his jaw. I sent guards to her chambers the moment we found the correspondence. And? It's empty. His voice was restrained, but she felt the echo bond carry a wolf's frustrated fury at losing a scent. Packed and cleared, she knew we were getting close. Yasmin absorbed that. So she's gone. Gone from her chambers, not from this castle. He turned from the window. A building this size, she could be anywhere. And she has allies here. People she's cultivated for years who don't even know they're being used. The thought settled over the room like fog. Ivana wasn't running. She was repositioning. That night, Yasmin found out exactly how close Ivana was. She was alone in her workspace, later than usual, one candle burning low. She'd been cross-referencing the Ashwork compound again, looking for the precise counteragent, turning the problem over and over in her mind. She reached for her evening tea without thinking. The cup was already halfway to her lips when something stopped her. A ghost of sharpness beneath the chamomile, so faint it barely registered. She held the cup under the candle instead, watched the steam rise and read it the way she'd trained herself to read everything. There, beneath the chamomile, that unmistakable dark sweetness. She set the cup down with extreme care, as though it were alive, and sat very still while the full implications of it settled over her like cold water. She knows which room I'm in. Not a guess. Not luck. Someone had been watching her movements, her routines, the small daily habits she hadn't even realized she'd developed. Someone who knew she worked late, knew she made tea at this hour, knew exactly which cup she'd reach for without looking. Someone still inside these walls. She took the counteragent from her pocket. She'd carried it on her person since the banquet, a habit she'd hoped was paranoid, and drank it in 2 measured swallows. Her hands were not entirely steady. Then she went to the door. Heath was already in the corridor, standing outside her door with a candle in his hand and an expression that told her he'd been there for at least a few minutes, like something had pulled him out of his chambers and down the stairs before he'd fully understood why. His eyes found her face, and whatever he saw there confirmed it. "It's my tea," she said. He made a sound low in his throat. She felt it through their bond, a spike of raw, ragged fear. He closed the distance between them, one hand coming to her jaw, tilting her face toward his candle, checking her eyes. She let him, grateful for the solid reality of him. "I took the counteragent," she said. "I caught it in time." "You could have." "I didn't." She curled her hand around his wrist, steadying them both. "I'm okay, Heath." But he didn't look okay. His jaw was tight, his eyes moving over her face like he was still checking for damage she wasn't telling him about. Through the bond, she felt it. The wolf in him pacing, furious at itself, the anguish of someone whose job he felt was to keep her safe, and who had nearly failed it in her own room. "She got into your workspace," he said quietly. "I should have had someone outside your door from the beginning. I should have—" "Heath." She kept her voice gentle but firm. "You couldn't have known. I should have assumed." He exhaled hard, pressed his forehead briefly to hers, his eyes closing. "I keep almost losing you. I would very much like to stop that." She stayed there for a moment, close enough to feel the warmth of him, the tension gradually working its way out of his shoulders. Then she pulled back, because if she stayed there any longer, she was going to say something she wasn't ready to say. "Then help me end it," she said. "For good." He opened his eyes. "We can't flush her out by searching," Yasmin continued, stepping toward the workbench, putting professional distance between them. "She's too careful. She'll stay hidden until she's ready, or until she has nothing left to lose." "Then we make her feel like she has nothing left to lose," Heath said, following her lead back into the problem, though she felt him watching her still. "Or we give her one last target she can't resist." His expression shifted. You want to use yourself as bait? Absolutely not, he said. I want to use the echo bond as bait, she corrected. She's been obsessed with it for years. She had the victims say echo before they died. That's not practical. There's no functional reason for it. That's personal. That's her announcing herself to us. Yasmin spread her hands across the workbench. So, we announce ourselves back. We let it be known, through the right ears, the right whispered conversations in corridors she has access to, that the echo bond has fully reactivated, that we've completed it. Heath was quiet. She'll know what that means, Yasmin continued. If the bond completes, the power dynamic shifts. A fully bonded Alpha King is twice as difficult to bring down. Her entire strategy relies on destabilizing you. She'll have to act immediately or lose her window. And when she acts, we'll be ready. Yasmin met his eyes. I'll have the counter compound synthesized in quantity, enough for the entire council table. We arrange a gathering, intimate, not formal, the kind where poison is the logical move, and we watch every person in that room. Heath held her gaze for a long moment. She felt the echo bond carry the war in him, the king who recognized the logic and the man who wanted to place himself between her and anything that might reach her. For the record, I hate this plan, he said finally. Noted. She almost smiled. Now do we do it? He looked at her for one more moment. We do it your way, he said. But Yasmin, he waited until she met his eyes. Not alone. Not one moment of it alone. I mean that. I know you do, she said quietly. And this time, she didn't look away first. The gathering took place 3 nights later in the small council chamber. 8 people around a circular table, fireside, the kind of intimate setting that whispered vulnerability. Heath had been clear about the attendees, all senior council members, including Ivana, who accepted, the invitation with a smile that Yasmin watched from across the room, a chill settling over her chest. Ivana was breathtaking in exactly the way Yasmin remembered. Silver gray dress, dark hair pinned high, the composure of someone who had never once in her life let her expression run ahead of her intentions. She greeted Heath with appropriate warmth, and Yasmin with a look of polished indifference that almost concealed the razor edge beneath it. Yasmin smiled back, kept her own expression open and easy, took her place at the table. The evening moved slowly at first. Conversation, wine, the careful navigation of political pleasantries. Yasmin tracked every movement in the room, the servers, the doors, the placement of each glass. Her own was untouched. She watched Ivana. Ivana watched Heath. And then, in the small window between the second and third course, when the servers shifted and a new decanter was brought to the table, Yasmin saw it, Ivana's hand, a movement so small and practiced it would have been invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. A ring turned, a thin stream of something colorless falling into Heath's cup. Done in under a second, covered immediately by reaching for the bread, and a perfectly timed reply directed at the councilman on her left. Yasmin was on her feet. Stop! The word expanded outward from her, swallowing all the other noise in the room. Every head turned. She walked to Heath's cup, lifted it, held it to the nearest candle. The vapor confirmed it. Not shadow veil this time. Something faster. The kind of dose that didn't leave time for antidotes. She set the cup down and looked across the table at Ivana. Ivana looked back at her. And then, for the first time, the composure cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough for Yasmin to see what was underneath it. Not fear, not guilt. Something colder and more complicated, the expression of a person who has spent years arranging a very elaborate structure and, wasn't about to let it falter tonight. Lord Ferris pushed for the Eastern Peace Treaty, Yasmin said, her voice steady, filling the room. So did Lord Anselm. So did Councilwoman Petra. All three advocates for the policy that would have removed your leverage entirely. She kept her eyes on Ivana. And all three died from a Shadowvale compound built on work from my private journals. Journals that were accessed from my chambers in this castle 3 years ago, while I was here and you were studying me. Ivana's chin lifted. Something almost like admiration crossed her face. You're very good, she said. I always thought so. It was frankly inconvenient. The room erupted. Heath's guard moved first. 2 men, fast and trained, closing on Ivana before she was fully out of her chair. But she was faster. She moved with the vicious efficiency of someone who had been planning this exit for weeks, twisting free of the first guard's grip, driving her elbow into the second with a precision that dropped him sideways. And then the shift began. This was savage, urgent. The silver-gray dress tearing at the seams, the beautiful composure dissolving into something that had been waiting a long time to surface. A wolf, black as a moonless night, sleek, built for speed rather than power, and already moving before the shift had fully completed, using the momentum of transformation to propel herself. The remaining guards scrambled. Ivana hit the first one like a battering ram, sending him crashing into the council table hard enough to scatter glasses and send candles skidding. Screaming erupted around the room. Someone overturned their chair, fleeing for the door. Their carefully arranged trap was collapsing in real time, and Yasmin had about 3 seconds to recalibrate. She had her hand in her pocket before she'd finished the thought. The paralytic vial, prepared just that morning, the throw she'd practiced alone in her workspace at midnight because she'd known it might come to this. Then Heath shifted. His wolf was enormous, larger than Ivana's, wheat gold and moving with the terrifying controlled power of something that had done this 1,000 times. He put himself between Ivana and the room's occupants with a speed that stole Yasmin's breath, and for a moment she thought it was over, thought the size advantage alone would end it. But Ivana didn't fight him directly. She was far too clever for that. She feinted left, drew Heath's lunge, and went right, not toward the door, not toward the council members still scrambling for the exits, toward Yasmin. The echo bond detonated, not the warm whisper of the past 9 days, the full force of it, raw and primal and consuming, Heath's terror crashing through her so completely she felt it in her bones. She saw him spin, saw him try to course correct, saw the exact moment he realized he wasn't going to reach her in time. Ivana covered the distance between them in 2 strides. So Yasmin threw the vial at the floor, 3 feet short, deliberately, because she'd done the math. She needed the mist between them, not on them, and she had exactly 1 chance to get this right. The vial shattered over the stone. The mist bloomed upward in a pale cloud, fast expanding, and Ivana hit the leading edge of it mid-stride. Her front legs buckled. Her shift began reversing, but the momentum was already there, already committed, and Ivana's half-shifted body caught Yasmin at the shoulder as she went down. The impact sent Yasmin into the wall with a hard crack. She hit the flagstones. She looked up, and the room was tilting. Distantly, she heard shouting, the sounds of guards converging, Ivana's ragged gasping as the paralytic completed its work. Then Heath was there, shifted back, on his knees beside her on the flagstones with both hands on her face. How had he moved so fast? How long had she been out? His eyes were wild in a way she'd never seen them, every careful layer of the king stripped away. Yasmin. His voice was wrecked and terrified. Look at me. Look at me right now. I'm looking, she managed. His hands were shaking. You hit the wall. I've hit worse. Yasmin. Heath. She said his name the way he'd said hers, quietly, directly, cutting through the panic. "I'm here. It worked. Look." She turned his face gently toward the room. Ivana lay on the flagstones 8 feet away, conscious but immobile, her dark hair spread loose around her, the silver dress torn at the shoulder. 2 guards stood over her. The rest of the council had pressed themselves against the far wall, some still clutching each other, all of them staring. 3 years of careful planning ended on a stone floor. Heath looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at Yasmin, and something in his expression shifted, the terror draining slowly. "You practiced your throw," he said. "Every night this week." He made a sound, something between a laugh and a noise of pure anguish, and pulled her against him, one hand cradling the back of her head with a care that made her chest ache. She let herself stay there, breathing him in, feeling the echo bond settle from its roaring peak back into its steady warmth. "It's over," he said against her hair. She looked past his shoulder at Ivana being carefully lifted by 2 guards. "Yes," Yasmin said quietly. "It's over." She felt his arms tighten around her before she drifted off. The castle settled into a different rhythm in the days that followed. Ivana's trial was swift. The evidence was too comprehensive for it to be anything else. The council voted unanimously. Yasmin gave testimony in a clear, steady voice and felt the last of her adrenaline leave her when she walked out of the chamber. Her shoulder needed 4 stitches. The castle physician did 3 of them before Heath quietly took the needle from his hands and finished the last one himself, with a focus and care that made her look away, because watching his face while he did it was more than she could absorb. She didn't ask him to stop, but she did begin preparing to leave. It was the logical thing. She'd come for a specific purpose with a specific endpoint, and both had been satisfied. She packed her herbs, rolled her journal into her satchel. The workspace looked exactly as it had when she'd arrived, cleared, impersonal, as though she'd never been there. She told herself she was glad of it. She'd come here for closure, and she'd found something better. The wound in her heart she'd been mending for 3 years had become a scar, faded and healed, and finally, fully hers. That was enough. The rest of it, the echo bond humming quietly in her chest, the memory of him finishing the last stitch and pressing his lips briefly to her knuckles without a word. That was something she needed to sit with before she could trust what it meant. She needed to go home first. Heath found her on the morning she'd planned to leave. He appeared in the doorway of the workspace, and she knew from his face that he'd known she was going. The brief tightening around his eyes told her everything about how well he'd slept. He crossed the room and set something down beside her satchel. A small pressed flower, dried and careful, folded in a piece of parchment worn soft at the edges from handling. She recognized the bloom. Night bloom. Rare. Growing only in the far northern valleys. She had picked one on the last night of their affair and pressed it into his hand at dawn, her throat too tight for words, telling herself it was just a small thing, just a token. "You kept it," she said, wonder softening her voice. "Every day since." He stayed on the other side of the bench, giving her room. She looked at the flower for a long moment. "I know what you're going to say," she said softly. "Let me say it anyway." He moved around the bench slowly, stepping close enough that she could see the careful control in his expression. "I came to Eldridge, watched you laugh through a window, and I walked away because I thought you'd found something better, and it was the single worst decision I have ever made. And I have made some genuinely catastrophic decisions, Yasmin, so that's saying something." Despite everything, she felt the ghost of a smile pull at her lips. "I'm not asking you to stay because of the bond," he continued. He reached out and took her hand, turning it palm up, the same gesture from the healing room floor 3 years ago that had started all of it. I love you. I loved you when I didn't have the sense to say it, and I loved you when I didn't have the right to, and I love you now, standing in this room watching you pack a bag I don't want you to pack." He met her eyes directly. "If you're not ready, go back to Eldridge, close the house, take whatever time you need, but come back to me. Come back and let me make up for everything I got wrong the first time." Yasmin looked at him, at the man who had finished her stitches with shaking hands, who had carried her pressed flower for 3 years, who had stood outside her window in the rain and walked away because he loved her too much to be selfish. "That's a compelling case," she said quietly. Something flickered in his expression. "Is it enough?" She reached out and picked up the night bloom from the bench, turned it carefully in her fingers. This small, dried thing that had traveled 3 years and 2 kingdoms and 1 big misunderstanding to arrive back in her hands. "I'll need to go back to Eldridge," she said. "Close the house properly. Bring my things. After which," she continued, "I'd be open to another conversation. A starting point." She allowed herself finally to smile at him properly, the first real one in 9 days, unguarded and genuine, and she felt it move through her whole face. "You'll have to make a very compelling case, ongoing." A look crossed his expression then, relief crashing into warmth, crashing into something so undefended it made her chest ache. "Don't be too long. I find I'm in a sour mood without you." He lifted his hand and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers grazing her cheek. The echo bond hummed between them, warm and steady. "May I?" he asked. She answered by closing the distance herself. The kiss was nothing like the desperate one in the corridor after the banquet. It was slower, more certain. The kind of kiss that knows it has time and intends to use it. His hands cradling her face with a tenderness that made her knees unsteady, his thumbs brushing the corners of her jaw as though mapping every inch he had once lost the right to touch. She felt the echo surge, his longing pouring into her, her own rising to meet it, until the boundary between them blurred, and all she could feel was the steady, aching rhythm of his heart answering hers. When they parted, foreheads resting together, both breathing unevenly in the morning light, she spoke first. "I missed you," she said quietly, the words she'd been carrying without anywhere to put them. "I know," he murmured against her hair, arms tightening around her. "I missed you every single day." And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself believe there would be enough days ahead of them. The northern valleys were extraordinary in autumn. She'd forgotten that. She'd been here once before, midsummer, 3 years ago, during a brief expedition Heath had organized for the court's senior scholars. She remembered the valley as green and overwhelming, the night bloom fields in full flower, so purple they'd looked almost violet against the sky. She'd picked one on the last evening, standing exactly where she was standing now, and pressed it into his hand at dawn the following morning. Now the fields had turned to amber at their edges, the late-season blooms fading to a softer lavender, the mountains beyond, them dusted with the first suggestion of snow. Heath had said nothing when he'd suggested this route, just watched her face when they crested the final ridge and the valley spread out below them, and she'd understood, with the clarity the echo bond lent her now, that he'd known exactly what he was bringing her back to. "You planned this," she said. He was smiling in that unguarded way now, simply devastating as he helped her off her horse. "It's different in autumn." She crouched to examine the late-season blooms, turning one carefully in her fingers, feeling the papery delicacy of it. Heath's shadow fell over her after a moment. She'd felt him approach before he arrived. "The Eastern Peace Treaty passed this morning," he said. "Unanimous vote." She looked up. Petra would have been glad. She would. Yasmin rose slowly, the night bloom still in her hand. She turned it in her fingers and thought about the woman who had stood in this exact spot 3 years ago. The things she'd been carrying then, the things she hadn't known how to say. She tucked the bloom into Heath's lapel. He looked down at it, then up at her. "Last time you gave me one of those," he said quietly, "you left before I could say anything." "I remember. I've been thinking about what I would have said." His hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his chest, holding it there. "If you'd stayed long enough to hear it. That I knew what it meant." His voice was low, certain. "That I knew you weren't just giving me a flower." "Tell her the rest," his wolf said immediately, with the impatience of an eager child. "Tell her what you want." Heath cleared his throat. "I also want you to know that the next time we come to this valley," he paused, "I intend to ask you something. Not today. You've had enough surprises this season, but I want you to know it's coming, so it doesn't catch you off guard." Yasmin went very still. "I'm glad I came back," she said. "To all of it. The valley. The castle." She looked up at him. "And especially you." His hand tightened over hers. She'd spent 4 months learning that some wounds, properly tended, didn't leave you smaller, that some second chances were worth the terror of reaching for them, that the bravest thing she'd ever done wasn't synthesizing an antidote or throwing a glass vial at a leaping wolf, but walking back through a gate she'd once fled through and deciding, with full knowledge of the cost, to try again. Heath brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles in the fading light. "Next time," his wolf said contentedly, settling into quiet. "Next time, we come here. Forever." "Where are you watching from?" I read every comment, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people find these stories.